Hi, gang. Donna here. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Devesh Tilokani. He talks about his move from Dubai to Canada. And while for some that move may not seem like that big a deal, even though it is drastic, because you're talking about two different cultures, two different lifestyles, but there's something more important here. When he was a teenager, he had crippling social anxiety. And nowadays, after the pandemic, and even during it, since we're not sure what's going on, there's still some issue of social anxiety and how do we relate to people. So he kind of talks about his own experience and how he made it through and got past it to be able to achieve his dream of leaving Dubai. How are you doing, Devesh?
All good, all good. I mean, the weather isn't too good where I'm at. There's thunder in Toronto, but other than that, we're doing good.
A lot of rain or just a little bit of rain?
A little bit of rain, but more just like the lightning and thunder. It kind of at like 8 p.m. It just kind of on a summer night, it kind of just doesn't set the mood right, I guess. I don't know.
It's kind of when I lived in Louisiana, we had a lot of heat lightning. It wasn't any storms involved, it was just lightning that would come around. So, but we didn't come here to talk about the weather. We came here to talk about your big move. And you used to be in Dubai, correct?
Yeah. I lived there for 18 years of my life, born and brought up over there. Originally, my family's from India. They migrated there about 25 years ago. And yeah, been there for 18 years before decided to move to Canada about 4 years ago.
So what's it like to live in Dubai?
It's interesting. It's there's like I guess at least in this part of the world, people think that it's all the glamour and everyone's kind of driving a really nice car and living in a really big house. Um, I'd say that yes, up to a certain extent, that is true. But also there's a different side to it. Um, so it isn't as glamorous as people think. I think Dubai is a great place to go for a couple of weeks to go and enjoy as a tourist. Living your entire life there were pros and cons to it. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into that. But that's just like I guess a brief overview of like sort of how it is to live over there.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm originally from New Orleans, so a lot of people I know, they're like, "Oh, New Orleans is so great," and they're just like, I left when I was 16. I went back for a bit, and it's not that New Orleans is a bad place because I have family there and still, and there's a lot of culture and a lot of history, but I don't want to move back. But I have friends that are just like, I would love to live there, so I can understand where you're coming from. I think
Yeah.
when you haven't lived someplace most of your life, it kind of is like, well, yeah, it's not as thrilling. And yes, Supercar Blondie. My husband used to watch Supercar Blondie. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her or not, but she always shows up in these expensive cars and does these videos. And my husband used to watch it, and she lives in Dubai, so that's
Wow.
why I bring that up. So yes, and it's always about the glamorous fast car, and so yes,
Yeah.
Dubai is very definitely you visualize it as something very expensive to live, a place to be that's very expensive to live in and very glamorous. So I can understand. So
They've
go ahead.
and I'm saying they just branded the city really well. Like it's literally like a greatest probably story when it comes to branding. So the city's been branded really well, and I think it is still a really luxurious city. But of course, there's other elements to it. That's for sure.
I think that's anywhere. I mean, Los Angeles. If you look at Los Angeles, that's pictured as a glamorous place, but then a lot of the truth has come out about Los Angeles. But when it was back in the day, when it was Hollywoodland and stuff, there was always that glamorous image to it. So
Exactly.
now you know the reality.
Yeah.
So what made you decide after 18 years there to move to Canada?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so for me personally, it was like you've kind of been in a place for your entire life, and yes, it's going great. It's well. I have a great relationship with my parents. All good on that end. But the thing was that there is that limit of your comfort zone where you feel like you're kind of stagnated in one place, and you kind of need a bit of a change. So I was like, hey, why don't we try to pursue like my undergrad in like a different part of the world completely? And I was like, what's something that's pretty far from here? I was like, Canada seems like a pretty cool option. Um, the States, I mean, it's just way more expensive to live there and kind of study and all that. So Canada is a little bit cheaper and just seems like people, at least the stereotypical like nice Canadian per se.
Hmm.
Um, so I was like, hey, let's try it out. Decided to move there. And it was, I remember I arrived in Toronto at the airport not knowing a single person in the entire continent.
Okay.
I'd never been there in my life, North America, like the entirety of North America. I landed about a week before we were starting like our university. And I think I knew like one other person that was coming with me, two other people actually that were coming with me. Um, but other than that, it was like going to a completely new culture, place, location, different people. And yeah, it's been the best 4 years of my life living here, honestly. And of course, we can dive deeper into those 4 years. But when you just look back at that one specific moment when you made that split second decision where you're just like, I'm just gonna take this plunge and go. Um, I remember there were a lot of there was like a voice in my head that I was like, what is wrong with you? Why would you just leave everything and go there? But there was another voice that was saying there is a lot of room for growth per se, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I did a lot of moving after I graduated. Well, I didn't graduate. After I graduated high school, I moved out, and then I moved back home, and then I moved to Dallas, and then I bounced several different states in the United States, and it's always like, I've had people say, "Well, that's crazy," but I wish I were you. I wish I would have taken that jaunt. And I mean, I applaud you for moving across the world, because that's even bigger than just moving from a state to a state. You
Yeah.
know, um, so did you have to learn? I mean, I know you speak English very well. Was there any problem with colloquialisms? Certain words that
Yeah.
they have in Canada that you're like, what the?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was like certain things that we hear that were there were definitely culture shocks in different aspects, but if you just break it down to like the words and the sort of the grammar and all that kind of stuff. First of all, a lot of people were surprised that me as an international coming into the country, I could speak really good English. That was because Dubai is just so multicultural. As
Mhm.
an example, in like my high school class, like one of my classes, there were like 25 people and we had 17 nationalities, as an example, you know?
Okay.
So you have people from all over the world, and your common denominator is English. So I spoke English my entire life. My parents, like my dad, he's lived all around the world before, he settled down. So spoke English in the house as well. So kind of had that practice. A lot of internationals coming in from different parts of the world to North America. Sometimes they don't have that sort of same level of practice. So it's pretty grateful for my upbringing that I kind of had that background. Um, I'd say that there were definitely like certain things that Canadians would say or do where I was like, wait a sec, that doesn't really make any sense over here.
Yeah.
Even certain like accent things, like for example, Canadians, they like to, for example, the about, it goes like about as an
Hmm.
example, like the O and the U. At times, there were like small things that I was like picking up as I was going. Um, and I wouldn't say it was that big of a challenge per se when it comes like culturally, because one thing about Dubai was that we were exposed to a lot of North American sort of culture per se when it
Hmm.
came to pop culture per se when it came to movies, music, TV shows, just general kind of stuff. So coming in, that really helped, knowing that I was sort of listening to the similar music, watching similar stuff per se,
Hmm.
but there were definitely like certain mannerisms or words, and I can't remember too many off the top of my head,
No, I
that I
know.
was just like, uh, guys, you got to catch me up on this. Like, I have no idea what's going on over here. But like that way, like most people here were super, super, super helpful, because when you have someone that's international, I kind of saw it as a strength. Because, like, for example, if you're from Toronto and I'm from Toronto, we both are from Toronto, cool, we can talk about a couple of things about Toronto, but after that, the conversation kind of dies out. But
Right.
if you say you're from Toronto and I say I'm from Dubai, automatically it's like, whoa, Dubai, that's way far from here. Let's like have a conversation about this. So it kind of became like a conversation starter instead of conversation ender per se.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
I get
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, because when I moved from New Orleans, you're way younger, but in the 80s, there's a real bad propensity for the New Orleans accent to be portrayed in movies with a southern drawl like that. And the truth of the matter is, most people from New Orleans sound like they're from New York. They have a slightly New Yorkish sounding accent. And so when I moved up to Shreveport, which is in the same state, I had people accuse me that I was from New York. And I'm like, no. And even just in the same state, we had different words for different things. And I had just started driving, and we had to get this thing called a brake tag in Louisiana, in New Orleans. But everywhere else in the state, it was an inspection sticker.
Wow.
So if you went somewhere in Shreveport and you're like, "Hey, I need to get a brake tag?" They're looking at you like you're insane, because we don't know what you're talking about. So I mean, even in the states, in one state in particular, you could have different meanings for different words. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But you did have the benefit of being able to open up that conversation, and that's good. So, this actually kind of goes into something else you talked about, which was your social anxiety. So, having social anxiety is a very hard thing to be around people you don't know. So, how did you deal with this?
Oh, that was a journey in itself. I'd say for the first 16 years of my life, definitely social anxiety played a huge aspect. And I remember one day it was just that I'd kind of lived with it for 16, 17 years. I know it doesn't seem like a long time, but when it impedes you so much,
Mm-hmm.
when it came to middle school, when it came to the starting of high school, at least, it's like, I just need to figure out a way to kind of get over this. And I remember asking myself once I was going to bed, and I was just kind of like, I was like, I'm 16 right now. And the way I'm living my life, whether I'm 16 or I'm 60, I'm not really going down the right path. I'm missing out on so many opportunities around me. And it's like, right before you go to speak up to someone, it's that voice in your head that keeps pulling you back. And you're just like, um, I'm not going to go ahead and do it. And when you keep stopping yourself from pushing yourself out there, it can kind of start playing on you mentally as well. And then I was just like, I just got to take some action. Whatever it is, just some action, whether it's something as simple as just going to the store and speaking to the cashier, like something as simple as that, but got to take some action. And then from there started this whole journey where I was like, let's try to speak to one new person every single day. It could be a 30-second conversation, but just get your reps in. And over the next 5 years, I think I spoke to over 1,400 people. Um, and that was a journey in itself. I remember another example when I came to Canada a couple of years after that. And I came to university. I mean, I didn't know anyone over here. And when I was in like the residence, like the
Mm-hmm.
common area residence, I used to just go up to people that were like sitting down and just sit with them and start talking. And that's how I met some of my best friends. And of course, the first 30 seconds, the first minute, it is super awkward,
Yeah.
unbelievably awkward. But once you just push through that little bit, the first 30 seconds to a minute, either the conversation starts to like pick up, or you notice you're not going to get along with this person, you just move on. Simple as that.
Right.
And it's like kind of letting yourself be able to move on. Like I have this, like I keep telling this to people who sort of go through this shyness or social anxiety per se, that for every 10 people that you talk to, there's 3 that you may just not get along with at all. There's like 5 where the conversation will be okay, whatever, like in between. But there's 2 out of those 10 where you're just going to kill it and you're going to hit it off. And it is worth it going through the first 8 to get to the last 2,
Yeah.
you know? And that was sort of my experience when I spoke to like over 1,400 people per se, getting to those 10 or 20% of people that you just hit it off with completely. It's worth it to go through all those other people. Yeah.
Which, here's something to talk about, because social anxiety is a big thing. And now, with everybody being in lockdown, now everybody coming back to try to deal and integrate back into society in a normal way. How hard do you think that is going to be for you? I mean, do you think it's going to be a hard thing again, or you think you've got this down and it's going to be fine?
It's interesting. Yeah. I caught myself. I mean, now I'd say, I like to say, not to sound narcissistic, but I like to say I'm a little more self-aware now. So when those feelings started to creep in during the pandemic, I was like pushing myself to meet new people every time on LinkedIn or on any sort of like social platforms per se. So a great example of a platform that I found was Lunch Club. Would definitely recommend it if you're someone that's, let's say, socially anxious, shy, whatever. I'd say that Lunch Club, it's basically an app where they match you with people professionally to kind of network with people. And you basically just match with someone that you've never met before. They could be from anywhere in the world. And you just kind of have one-on-one conversations with them. So that was an example. Like I found myself in that same position where I was like, I've been at home for a while, haven't spoken to that many people. I'm starting to see that social anxiety start to creep in again. How can I manage this in a virtual setting? And I basically signed up for that app. It's completely free, and you can like sign up if you want to meet 2 people, 3 people, 4 people per week. I signed up to meet like 3 people per week as an example, and every week I was meeting 3 new people. That just kind of kept the ball rolling per se, and at least kept that muscle going of like
Yeah.
actually being able to converse with people. I'd say for sure you're gonna lose some amount of your social skills when you're not been out that long, but at least doing it in a virtual setting like this, it definitely helps.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, without Zoom and stuff, you would be very limited as to who you could talk to and who you could focus with. Focus on in a conversation and what you need to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, for me, and I've talked about this before, my life completely changed because I lost somebody, and it wasn't because of COVID, but my whole life changed, and even the normal funeral service, the normal thing, those things didn't happen. And so it's just like I sat there today and I actually thought, it popped in my head, I'm like, all the traditions, and I know, how does this apply, but it's a social situation. All the traditions about getting married and having a kid, I never did any of that. I didn't have a baby shower, I didn't have a bridal shower, I didn't have a bachelorette party. And it's like, did I really miss out on anything?
Yeah.
It's the social situations. It's like those are those milestones that we thrive to hit, but did I really miss out on anything?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I did, but those are the things you're expected to have in life. So, do you see yourself embracing those kind of things? And I'm not saying a bridal shower, but
Yeah.
do you see yourself embracing those kind of events in your life? The milestones that you share in your culture. Do you see yourself being willing to embrace those bigger events in the bigger social situations now that you have worked on your social anxiety?
It's an interesting question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I'd say for me personally, I feel like I'm in a similar boat to you. Like sometimes I miss certain events, and I'm just like, uh, it is what it is, I guess. Um, I don't think that makes that makes you socially anxious per se. It's just that I guess it kind of sounds very cliche, but it's like kind of treat every day as if it's an event in itself per se. Sounds super cliche, and I'm not a fan of cliches, but it works in the end. Um, I don't know. It's like, yeah, for sure there are certain events where you come together either with friends, family, and those are great for those specific occasions per se. But I think, yeah, one thing COVID taught me myself is that at times we have a lot of unnecessary fluff in our lives, and it's kind of like zeroing in on what's important to you. So as an example, I never recommend going and speaking to 1,400 people. I always think that, like, if you want to be happier socially, it's always good to have 2 or 3 people that you're extremely tight with and you can actually connect with on a personal level. But that was just my personal journey to go through because I just suffered from that crippling social anxiety, and I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. So this
Right.
is a way for me to kind of work out per se. um, but I'd say that, yeah, I think the fluff per se of different events has been removed. And yeah, I'd be curious to know sort of like what's your experience with like missing out on these events per se.
And, well, okay, so I had, yesterday was the 4th of July here. Of course, we're supposedly celebrating it today. Anyway, um, and I know most of my listeners are going to be like, she is just weird. And that's fine. It got to a certain point with my husband when after his parents died, before his parents died, we were at every family function. And after his parents died, he was just like, well, my sister's got her kids. She's got her family. That's their family. You're my family. So we kind of quit. And he had other siblings. He had 2 other brothers and a sister at the time, and then his sister passed. But it was just kind of like, no, we're our own family. So holidays and everything just kind of became, it's another day. It's not a big deal. So, Mother's Day, I spent writing. Father's Day, I spent writing. Yesterday, I spent writing. Today, I spent writing. And the funny thing about it is, if you and my readers most likely will go, okay, how does this woman write this? I write about Christmas. I write about those holidays. I write about that family, the quintessential family experience.
Yeah.
But yet, I didn't necessarily always have that. And now
Interesting.
it's just a holiday. I mean, for some people it's just a holiday, and for me it's just like, it's just a day.
Yeah.
It's not that it doesn't mean anything, but it's a day. And I mean, my friends, when Christmas rolled around, I had one that was like, you're coming over Christmas Eve, and another one's like, you're going to be here Christmas Day. So even though I didn't have family per se, I had friends that became my family. And goes back to you saying you have 2 or 3 people that are close. That's the best way to have it, because those 2 or 3 people or 4 people have your back.
Yeah.
and they will be there for you when you need them. The first call I made when my husband passed was to my best friend, and she came and met me because we were in a parking lot somewhere, and she drove me to the hospital. So this, when you know that your friend is that tight and that good for you, then you know that's the right person. Because there are people that are going to come into your life and they're going to act like they're your friend, but ultimately, deep down inside, you know that if you called them to come help you, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah. And do you think in the end we're all just striving for that connection to have those people in our lives?
Yes. I think if you are truly wanting the human experience, yes. Don't you?
Yeah, 100%. And do you think then we kind of get caught up in the whole hurrah per se and kind of the whole glamour of it all, but kind of forget that one-to-one kind of connection, maybe?
Yes. And I mean,
Yeah.
as great as social media is, I mean, I grew up when we didn't have social media. So for me, we had that one-to-one connection. If you wanted to go to your friend, if you wanted to call your friend and they weren't there, you drove by their house. If they weren't there, then you were out of luck. You didn't see them. Now it's like, well, I can hunt you down. And, but it's still, there's not always that real connection because you picked up your phone back then. You didn't have caller ID. It's like, oh, okay, who's calling? All right. Now it's like, oh, not that I ever have done that to anybody, but it's one of those things where you can look at it, and I've seen people go, well, I don't feel like talking to them right now. Okay. So I think between social media, which creates the illusion back to Dubai, if you think about it, because it's this illusion of what the world should be, and the fact that we have so much stress and so much contact constantly now that we don't get to step away. I mean, anybody can find you anytime.
100%. One of the best things that I ever did for myself was I remember when I went on a trip. It was in the Himalayas, and I kind of switched off my phone for 9 days.
Wow.
Like I didn't switch off my phone, but I deleted all the social media apps, so you
Mm-hmm.
could only get to me to call. But I didn't even have like my the SIM card, so you couldn't really call me as well per se. Um, and that was an incredible experience. You're in the mountains. Um, you get to sort of explore your spiritual side, whether you believe in that or not. But
Yeah.
it was an unbelievable experience. Just sort of disconnecting for 9 days. I know that sounds less, but it was like, yeah.
It retrains you because we have become such an instant gratification society. If you're looking up, yes, once again, I'm going to go back to being old. If you wanted to look up a fact before, you had to look up in an encyclopedia. That most likely was way outdated, but still you're looking up in the encyclopedia. Now, oh, wait, let me look this up. Let me go over to my computer or my smartphone and look that right up. So it's instant gratification. If, there's been a movie, I don't even know which one it is now, but they had an EMP go off and it killed all electronics. And I'm like, if that ever happened now,
Yeah.
I mean, what you did when you did that, when you turned your phone off basically for nine days, even though you could still get calls, you reset yourself. And I've talked to parents on the podcast that they limit what their kids can do on it. They limit how many hours the kids can spend on it. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah. I don't know if you watched the documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, where it, like, the head chief marketing officer of Facebook and Pinterest said that he doesn't let his own kids until the age of 14 use those social media apps.
Wow.
And he's like the third or the fourth, like, in command at Facebook and Pinterest, as an example. And he
That's
didn't let his own kids. Like,
That
that's
says a
just,
lot. But I mean,
yeah.
how many times have you been in? How many times have you been in the grocery store? And I know for me personally, I've seen parents, and there's the little toddler in the shopping cart with their eyes fixed on the phone, and I'm like, I remember when my sister was born, she was like looking up at the lights, amazed. As a little kid, she was amazed with the lights. Now, even my own stepkids, they didn't have this to entertain them. They sat in the shopping cart, and that was that. Maybe had a Barbie, maybe didn't. But we now are. How do you? How are we going to go forward if the kid has to be constantly? Their mind constantly has to be going. When does their mind shut down? When can they relax? And is this going to be something that compounds stress on them?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I mean, of course you don't want to get too pessimistic, but at the end, the facts are the facts that mental health issues, depression, all these are going up from generation to generation. And does social media have a factor to play in that? I think yes, it does. I think, of course, there's so many benefits to it, but I don't know what the answer is. But it's like, how do you kind of try to minimize the drawbacks while maybe trying to at least keep the benefits in place?
I think part of I think a dangerous cycle we can get into with social media, and we'll say where somebody's TikTok famous for a day,
Yeah.
and then the next day the algorithm is playing with them and taps them down so they get no followers or no views. That tanks somebody's mood because suddenly they had this high and now they have the low. So in a way, how can you not compare it to a drug addiction?
Yeah.
Because people take drugs for what? That high. And then when they don't have the drug, they fall. So
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree to that for sure. I mean, I think we've all found ourselves there. I found myself, whether it comes to running your own personal brand, when it comes to running a company stuff, like on social media, it's like one post, for example, I'll post something on LinkedIn, it'll get 20 likes. I'm like, oh man, it gets 80 likes. I'm like, oh wow. And then it's just
mhm.
like you kind of watch your mind's thoughts that kind of move from when you have the 20 to like the 80 or the 100 likes. And you're just like, wow, you're going down a dangerous path if this is the way you're going to kind of define yourself with.
You have to step back and stop yourself. There was, I think, one of my first TikTok videos I did was a duet, and I got 1,200 likes or
Amazing.
1,200 views. That's what it was, and I don't remember how many likes, but I was still like 1,200 views, really? I think I've gotten 500 views now, the most, or 300 and something. That's my average, and it's like, you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Same thing with putting my book out there. It's like you can try and market it, and even the podcast you can push to market it. But honestly, you're up against an algorithm that is forever changing. So, and you can take a course, they'll teach you how to beat the algorithm until it changes again. And I mean, you just have to realize that it's gonna be what it's gonna be, and you have to, dare I say, be a cliche, stay in your lane. Stay focused on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get a message to somebody, the universe will find a way to get that message to somebody.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
may take a while, but eventually somebody will find it and they'll be like, wow, okay, yeah, I get this.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely. And a great point on that was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Pat Flynn, but he kind of does stuff in the podcasting space. And he mentioned, he's like, when you run a podcast, let's say you get something as simple as 30 listeners per episode. He's like, just imagine 30 people sitting in a room with you, with like them closely listening to every single word you're saying. Who wouldn't want that? So
yeah.
he's like, when you kind of put your numbers down and say, let's say I have only 30 listeners, 50, 100, 200, whatever, and you always want to kind of go above that. Sure. He's like, you want to grow, but at the same time, realize that just imagine like 100 people listening to an episode. That's 100 people sort of sitting in a room with you,
Hmm.
and you're right at the center of the room, at the front, and they're all listening to every single word you got to say.
And if you take it even a little bit further back, the power of, take the numbers out of it and just look at the countries you're reaching.
Yeah.
So you're reaching globally. You're not just reaching your hometown. You're reaching globally. When I was a disc jockey, it was my hometown. But this, you're reaching globally. Your message is getting out to different people, and some people that really need to hear it will.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually curious to know, like, with your book, how are you dealing with like the distractions per se? Like, when you're writing, for example, you mentioned today on this call, you wrote 4,000 words today. How are you dealing with like the social media distractions or whatever? Like, how are you keeping focused on sort of just writing? Maybe?
Occasionally, I'll take a break. When I finish the scene out, then I'll take a break and check things. I should be much better at social media, but you know, I look at it this way. There are times when today's an awesome day to write, and yes, it's flowing. And I wrote almost 4,000 yesterday, and it's just flowing. And then there's days where it doesn't flow at all, and then yeah, I'm on social media and playing around, and yeah. So for me, it just takes focus. My husband would always be baffled if we were watching a movie and I would scroll. Yes, because scrolling through social media. It's not that I'm bored with the movie. And he's like, "How can you do both? You're not focusing." And I would tell him exactly what was going on. He's like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "Just do."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I just pop on a social media, check it out real quick, and then
Yeah.
get back to writing because it becomes a time suck. It really does.
Yeah. 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 Like I've like thrown my phone like on the other side of the room, literally. Like today when just before we started our call, like
Hmm.
I have my bed nearby next to me. So I just chuck the phone in the bed, knowing that I cannot get anywhere next to it. So if a notification comes, like I'm with you 100%, and I'm not like just popping my head to the side and kind of looking at the phone, as an example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's back to the one-on-one connection. How many times have you seen somebody, you're at a restaurant and you see a couple sitting at a table and you don't know if they're married, you don't know if this is their first date or whatever, but they're both checking their phones. Why the heck are you there?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, are you there to actually socialize? Are you there to play social media games? I have a
Mhm.
friend who, when you walk into her house, she has a basket by her front door. It's not for your keys, it's for your phone.
Wow.
She also does intuitive medium work. And she's like, I don't want my clients. She lets me bring my phone occasionally if we're doing readings. But she's like, I don't let anybody record it. I don't want them to be distracted. I don't want that energy. Goes in the basket.
Amazing. Amazing.
And what you think about it, you're setting parameters for your guest, for your company, that, hey, this is going to be an engaging conversation. This is going to be social. This is not going to be let's play social media.
Yeah.
Because the term social media, unpack that.
So, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's social, sure. You can comment, you can bully, you can do whatever the heck you want. But are you really, truly, honestly making a social connection? Are you?
Most times it's not.
No.
Yeah.
And then you can come to the direct messages, which I'm not sure you've gotten, but there's always the direct message creepers that are like, "Hi, gorgeous," and you're just like,
Oh man. Yeah.
"I'm not
No.
20. If I was 20, I might fall for that line, but
I don't think your 20-year-olds fall off that line at this point, but yeah.
well, I guess it's better than the alternative that they occasionally send that nobody asked for, but that's okay. Anyway, we're digressing here. So, um, so we talked about your social anxiety. So let's talk about why. I mean, why did you decide to study in Canada? As far as, was there a specific program that was offered in Canada, as opposed to, I know you wanted to change in scenery, but and it was cheaper to go to Canada, but why? What were you studying?
Basically, I want to study business, but more importantly, more than that, I kind of wanted to figure out a place where I can sort of maybe look to a little bit more long term, like where could I actually immigrate properly. Canada's immigration tends to be a little more easier compared to other parts of the world. The UK was another option that I thought of, but again, the immigration system is a bit of a mess right now.
Mm,
Um, the US, as I said, it was a bit too expensive. Australia was another place I thought about, but I think I thought Canada might be an interesting option. I've been in the warmth my entire life in Dubai. Australia's pretty warm, so I was like, let's try out the cold for once. But I think one of the main reasons was because I actually wanted to kind of figure out a place where maybe I could settle down long term. And I do see myself in Canada staying for a couple more years at least. But I'm also someone that, and it's something we can talk about, but it's like whenever I planned in life has kind of like slapped me in the face and told me, you're not going here, you're going the complete opposite way.
mhm.
And most, like 9 times out of 10, it's turned out to be a good way. Like it's turned out to be a good slap in the face. Um, but yeah, that's kind of told me to kind of take a step back and just take it, like, of course, have your plans, like have your goals, whatever that you want to have, but kind of just take it on a day by day basis. So I'm like less rigid that, hey, I want to be here for 5 years and then here for 5 years and then here for 10 years. It's that, yeah, like it's like I'm here right now. Um, but I really don't know where I'm going to be in 6 months, and I really don't know where I'm going to be in a year from now.
As my husband would say, go with the flow. Just
Yeah.
go with the flow. And I mean, I can, what listening to you speak about that, it's like I think back to me when I was, right out of high school. If you would have told me I'd be here in Chicago, I'd have been like, yeah, right. It was not even on my radar, not even a thought. In fact, I had lived here briefly and then I moved back to New Orleans for a brief bit to go to school in 95. And I had a psychic tell me that I was going to come back up here. And I was just like, oh, hell no, I'll never go back up there.
Yeah.
I've been here 26 years. So,
Wow. That's
yeah.
amazing. That's
So,
amazing.
there
Well,
you
that
go.
psychic definitely was doing something right. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was one of those radio. She was on the radio at the local radio station. I took a shot and called her, and she was like, "Yeah, I see you moving back to Chicago." And I was just like, "Yeah, okay," because she saw my career based out of Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. I'm like, "All right, so we'll see,
Yeah.
we'll see." But
Would you
anyway,
consider moving out of Chicago, or would that be like something that you want to go long term?
I live in the burbs in Chicago. I live about 80 miles outside of Chicago proper.
Okay.
There was a time back in 2003 that I actually thought about moving to Los Angeles or to California. And I had a job offer to move to Stockton, which is not near Los Angeles. And they were going to move me everything else. And my friend, who ended up becoming my husband, said, "Why do you want to do that?" I'm like, "Because I want to move out there. I've been wanting to move out there. I've always wanted to live out that way." And because he asked me that, I kind of hesitated. So I turned down the job. And then 3 months later, the company was sold to a bigger company. And I wouldn't have had a job.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
That is some divine intervention or whatever you want to call it, I
Hmm.
guess, you know.
Well, what's even weirder is that when my husband and I started talking as friends, we worked down the street from each other prior and didn't know it. My old landlord was his boss at one point. We both worked at Chuck E. Cheese, even though I was in Shreveport and he was up here. So I mean, there was a lot of similarities to our lives. So sometimes, some things are just meant.
Yeah.
That's the way I
Yeah.
look at it.
Definitely.
So you have a newsletter called PodThrive. What is
Yeah.
this about?
Basically, it's about sort of helping podcasters become better at interviewing other people. I know that's something that I struggled with in the past when I still run a podcast on the side. So I know something that I struggle with. So just kind of getting the insights from different podcasters on what they've been doing to hopefully help other podcasters in the space, basically.
And podcasting is exploding.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good space to be in. I actually worked part time at a um, podcast booking agency. So basically, what they would do is they would use podcast booking as like a PR strategy for their clients.
Hmm.
So let's say you're an author and you want to promote your new book. They basically take you on a podcast tour where they book you on like 24 podcasts, um, and it was unbelievable the amount of money that clients were paying them for like doing these like podcast tours. And I was like, this is like insane. Like the space is growing so fast, at this point. And the company that I was with, when I started with them, I was their sixth employee. When I left 4 months later, I was their 19th employee, like the
Wow.
19th person to leave, basically. So that's how fast, like, I guess the space is constantly developing.
Well, there was a gentleman last year before I started doing my podcast, and I've talked about him a couple of times. He did a podcast where he started January 2020, January 1st, and each person, the first guest was him, which I did with my podcast as well, because I figured, and he did too, you put yourself on your own podcast, especially if you're going to dig personal, and you talk about something personal. And that's what I did. I'm like, I can't ask you guys to talk about something unless I'm willing to share too. So his podcast was based on fear. So for 365 days, he took one person a day and interviewed them about their biggest fear. And I was near the end of it. And that's actually how everything came about for me, because we were talking about losing my husband, and I told him about the statement about being better too. It was better to have loved him and lose him. And my book series is the Better to Burn Out series. So I was just kind of like, well, I didn't put the two together until after I named the podcast, but I was like, it's perfect branding. But at the time, it was just like, everybody's got a better two moment. And it's true. I mean, I've been gifted with talking to people from around the world and different walks of life and different careers, but everybody's got a better two moment. Unless you have no regrets in your life, and then that's very doubtful. You may be lying to yourself, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
everybody pretty much has that moment.
Yeah.
So I think, podcasting for me, watching him, he's not podcasting anymore that I know of. But I mean, he did it for 1 year. He said that was my goal. I wanted to do this for 1 year, and he did it.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, I mean, the depth that you can go in on a podcast, you can, like, let's face it, when you look at, when you open, when you switch on the news, the first thing that you see, it's like, they'll give someone like 30 seconds of airtime. And how can you ever dive deep into someone's story in 30 seconds? You
no.
know, as simple as that, so it's sort of the long form format of it, minimum 30 minutes, or let's say sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours as well. You can go so much more deeper into a person,
Yeah.
and sort of what they believe in, what their insecurities are, what, like, everything and anything. And that's the beauty of it personally.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the one thing I've connected with is having people being willing to share their story. And, sometimes I actually had a couple of people reach out to me and tell me how their story, somebody else's story, inspired them and made them feel like they weren't alone, and made the podcast made this a safe space for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, no matter what, that is the best thing in the world. It doesn't matter if I only have a handful of listeners. It doesn't matter if I have 100 listeners. That right there is worth it,
Yeah.
because you're making that human connection.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of the best feelings that you can have as a podcaster, as a podcast host. I think another amazing value point that people don't speak about with being a podcast host is, everyone speaks about the listener, and that you have this metric and you have that metric and you want to gain these many listeners. But I've actually, like, made some incredibly close friends through the guests that I've had on. We've
Hmm.
like posted podcasts, we've collaborated. I actually went out for drinks with one of my guests recently, because we both in the same city, as an example. So just like the connection that you make with the guest,
Hmm.
sometimes is next level, honestly.
There's been two recently that I've done that I sought these people out, so I didn't necessarily focus on the better two moment. The very last podcast of the season one, I reached out to an Australian model through a friend that knew him, and he actually won the Make Me a Supermodel contest. He was the
Wow.
first winner out of 40,000 people. He won, and he almost walked away from it before he even did his audition. So it was kind of a
Wow.
wild story. But that forced me, because I reached out to this person, to do a deep dive on them. And when I'm doing the interview with him, he sat there at one point and said, "Wow, you really did your research." It was like, yeah, because I was going where you guys, when you guys asked to be on the show, you guys give me a bio, and I don't have to necessarily do as much deep dive research as somebody else that, number one, has somewhat of a name, number two, I have no background on.
Yeah.
So there's more work to it. And actually, because I like researching, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, like, oh, that's one of the most, I think, if you want to stand out as a podcaster, and I could see 100% you've done your research, which is amazing. And just your way of questioning Donna is actually incredible.
Thanks.
I've been on quite a few at this point, and I'd say you're like top 2 to 3%, like really,
Thanks.
like top
Wow.
5% minimum at least.
High
So
praise.
I'd say
Thank you.
for sure, for sure. Because yeah, it's times like a lot of podcasters, they don't do their research and they're kind of clunky and they don't know how to further the conversation, and it's sometimes be a bit of a mess. But yeah, I think research, and it doesn't have to be like spend like 6 hours on someone,
No.
but it could be, you have no idea how much you can just get just looking at someone's LinkedIn profile and just
Hmm.
going through just like just scrolling a bit more, reading their about section, reading a bit more about some of their older experiences, some of their, something as simple as like volunteer experiences. Like, you just kind of get an idea of a person just from something as simple as a LinkedIn profile. And that takes
Yeah.
you 5 extra minutes, but if you can take one point out of there that can help you connect with that person, why not? Why not take this extra 5 minutes?
Right. And that's the thing. It's like I had an interview the other day, and I'm going to be back on his show. But he's a new podcaster, and I know he's a new podcaster because he sat there with a book, and he's flipping through to ask me the questions. And he asked me at one point, he's like, "So, what advice would you give to me about podcasting?" I'm like, "If I said for one, I said my show. I said I used to have an author chat on YouTube. I said, and I was very meticulous, and I would send the questions to my guests, and we would do everything very formatted." I said, now I don't do that. I said, I get my little bio, I have my notes, and then I just go. I said, everything's organic. I don't want to be rigid. I want the conversation to be like two people sitting down to talk. That's what I want. I said, if you want, and this is for anybody that's out there, if you want a rigid show, do your research, create your questions on a sheet of paper. So you're looking professional. And they have teleprompter apps. If you really want to go that far, read it from a teleprompter.
Yeah.
But, try to make it smooth. And I do have a problem with saying, and that's something I have to work on, but it's speaking. It's human nature. But
Yeah.
I
I've struck.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say I struggle with ums a lot. So I just think, but I just like kind of pinch myself whenever I say it. And I still do it. So like sometimes, a couple of times the conversation, I'm just like pinch myself when I said as an example. And it's kind of like setting that response, like
Hmm.
the cycle, like the bodily response to that. Whenever you do it, it's kind of like I don't know what the law is called. There's a specific way to say it, but yeah, it's just one thing that I've used personally.
I mean, for me, the one thing I think why I'm comfortable with interviewing is because I used to interview people in the car insurance car insurance business. I mean, in an accident, we were presented with, okay, so you have to talk to both the insured and the claimant, and you have to take a recorded statement from them. Now, granted, I also have the disc jockey background, and I also took some acting, but I would have never, if you would have told me that skill of interviewing people as far as a car accident would actually come into play later on in my life, I would have laughed at you. But it's true. I think that's part of the reason why I'm comfortable talking to people on here and having a conversation without being scripted, because you logically, the questions come to mind and they flow.
Exactly. Exactly. And people don't realize, but like active listening, it plays such a huge part, like an unbelievable part. Because what happens as a podcaster, and I found myself right there, we're not perfect from any means, is that when I'm talking, instead of you like listening to me, you're thinking about what the next question you're going to ask about that person. So it's really important to sort of, I guess, kind of follow what the guest is saying. And this is something that I've like had to like, it's taken me like over 30 to 40 episodes minimum to train myself on it. Um, but it's such an underrated skill. It's a skill that's very hard to kind of master. But once you master that, actually like actively listening instead of, for example, you speak for like a minute and the 20th second, Donna, you say something amazing. And I'm like, I want to ask you a question about that. But then you've already reached a different part. And if I ask you a question, we're going all the way back. So that how do you kind of like, make sure that
Oh,
you're, yeah, paying attention throughout.
speaking, well, I can tell you a prime example of that. In that podcast with the model, he had told me that his mother and his wife, girlfriend at the time, had tried to get him to do the contest.
Yeah.
And so we talk about that, and we talk about whales, and we talk about all sorts of other stuff because he's in Australia, like I said. So I circle back around to that part in the conversation because it pops back in my head. I'm like, so what did your wife and mother think about you winning? It was completely, we had removed ourselves from that situation, but I went back because it's like, well, it is a good question. So that's the one thing about it being organic is if you're having a conversation with friends, suddenly you may be talking about something, and I have a very bad propensity of that. My mind will go somewhere else. And it's not that I'm not listening because I am listening. It's just my mind has now tracked onto another thought. And it's like, okay, I listened. I will talk about this, and I will keep trying to hold on to this one little nugget
Yeah.
and then go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And that's a hard skill to master. It's a hard one for sure. But I think it's like going to the gym. You're kind of just putting in the reps,
mhm.
and I'm sure you've seen that with yourself. Like the first podcast, second podcast a little better, third a little bit better. And yeah, I think feedback is another huge thing. Like it's two things I always ask my guests at the end of my podcast. One thing is what I did good, and of course it's a bit of an ego boost, but it's also like what did I do good so I can scale that and do that more. And the second one is, of course, what do you think I can improve,
Yeah.
per se. For the second one, you have to really give them permission. So that's, of course, building the trust, because a lot of people don't want to be mean, as simple as that. But I'm like, hey, the meaner you are, the more I'm going to like this, you know? And yeah, I've got some golden nuggets from there, you know?
It's like a book review, and it amazes me when somebody will leave a 3-star rating, which I only had one, but they leave a 3-star rating and no feedback. So you're like, okay, so what could I have done to make it better?
Yeah.
But if you don't give me that, I mean, most of my reviews have been 5 to 4 stars, and that's fine. But at least I got feedback. If you're only giving me a 3-star and you're not telling me what's wrong, how do I fix it? Same thing with a podcast. How do I fix it? If there's something you guys don't like, how can I fix it if I'm not getting any feedback?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Feedback is huge. Yeah. Number one is, of course, asking for feedback. Number two is also being able to be coachable when you actually get the feedback. So I think those are two different elements, but they kind of come together in their own way.
Well, and feedback can also tie into social anxiety
Yeah.
when you think about it, because you're putting yourself out there to be vulnerable. And that can get your social anxiety going because are you scared of being rejected?
Yeah.
Which,
It's
go ahead.
no, I agree with you 100%, you know.
Which, that is something. Have you had, let's go back to social anxiety. Step away from the podcast for a second. Let's go back to social anxiety. Have you had that experience where you've met somebody or you've introduced yourself to somebody and you went to reach out to them and they were just blatantly nasty to you for even trying?
Oh, so many times, yeah. And not say so many times, but I'd say, yeah, like if I had to like put a percentage number on it, I'd say like about 3 to 4% of people. Um, and of course, the first couple of times when that happens, it's disheartening for sure, you know, but you just kind of realize that. I kind of put it in this way. And I work in sales as well, like full
Oh,
time in a role.
okay.
So I literally get paid to have conversations with people on a daily basis. And we're speaking to finding people on a daily basis. So you meet people that are pretty nasty to you sometimes. But I think to myself, I'm like, if this person is being nasty to me, there's a couple of reasons why. One, they're just having a really bad day. That's perfectly fine. You can show some compassion at that moment. Two, they're just in a really horrible space in their life right now, and they're removing that out on someone else. So it's kind of just more pity and compassion than just sort of hatred. Of course, that's after the situation. At
Yeah.
that moment, of course, at times it's hard to pull back, and you're just kind of like pissed as well. But that's one kind of like sort of sales tactic per se that I learned from one of my mentors that he told me. He's like, whenever you cold call, whenever you're on a sales call and someone's mad at you, this can be for that, it could be for anything. And they like say something, just like be super vulnerable with that. Like I've actually, it's happened with me once where I was calling a prospect. It was a sales call, and this prospect got a little mad at me, and then I was just like, let's say John Doe as an example. So I was like, John, honestly, man, I'm sorry. It's just that I've been having a bit of a shitty day myself, and I completely butchered the sales pitch, and I wasted your time, and I'm genuinely sorry. And he was like, he kind of just calmed down, and he was like, Devesh, it's fine. I'm just having a bad day myself, you know. So just go ahead. It's fine. Like I have a couple of minutes. Go ahead. So when I disarmed myself, the other person
Hmm.
disarmed as well. You know, so of course there will be a tendency to first take it personally, so vent it out. But once you're kind of done with that, go in and analyze the situation and realize that there's a couple of reasons why people are mean to you or nasty, and most of them is just because they're going through their own like stuff, basically. Um, I mean, you realize that it's more compassion than anything else.
I was watching a story on TikTok. This girl was talking about how she worked at a nail salon, and Paula Abdul was supposed to be coming in for an appointment,
Wow.
and she was 2 hours late. And she was supposed to be getting her, I think, her eyelashes done and her nails. And they could, because she was late, they couldn't accommodate her. And she was apparently so rude. Hold on, hold on. So the girl who was doing her nails, she takes a break while Paula's drying. She goes next door to the coffee shop and she's talking to her friend that's the manager over there. And they're like, Paula's sweet. Step back. She most likely is having a bad day. You don't know why she was 2 hours late. You don't know what happened. She comes back, and Paula's very nice and, doesn't apologize, but she's very cordial. She's not so mad. And the next time she came in, and every time after that, she was just sweet as pie. But the fact of the matter is, you don't know what's going on. If my husband and I had a disagreement, that's the one thing I will always say. If somebody is arguing with you, and he had a lot of health issues, which when your body betrays you, you tend to get aggravated. You don't realize it, but you do. And so there would be times where he would say a not so nice word, and, like MF, and I would be like, what's wrong? He's like, is your name MF? And I'm like, no. But I knew he would be ticked off, so I'd walk away and I'd wait about 30 minutes and I'd come back and I'm like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. He's like, that wasn't about you. I couldn't see something, or I couldn't do something. And I think that's the thing we get away from. We don't look at what's going on in somebody else's life. We just look at what's in front of us.
Yeah.
And social media has taught us that. Has it not?
100%. A great example, when someone posts a nasty comment on your social platform, just think about it. This person, and this is another layer to it, this person took out 30 seconds, 60 seconds out of their day to actually go and hate on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
How bad does their life, or how bad of a situation do they need to be in their life to actually do that?
Uh-huh. Go ahead.
It's just really interesting to me that you're taking 60 seconds to a minute. Yeah, you're taking 60 seconds to a minute out of your day to go and post hate on someone else's platform, on someone else's content. You got to be in a really bad space to do that, so it's just at that point you do, of course, in the starting, again, as I mentioned, it's completely fine to feel like horrible at that point, but then when you realize that, you kind of feel just compassion for the person, that damn, your life has to be pretty crappy for you to say that to someone.
I appreciate the conversation.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, as I mentioned, I think you're like, I'd say minimum top 5% of podcast hosts that I've been on, for sure. So I just want to say thank you so much for sort of exploring the story and creating a safe space for us to kind of be vulnerable over here.
Well, I gotta ask though, was your better to moment true? Was it better to move to Canada from Dubai?
I'd say it was true. There are days when you do think it's false sometimes, but I'd say 99 out of 100 days, I think it's true for sure.
Good. Well, I do have one other question. So, because hopefully we won't cut out, I do have one other question, and that is, imagine if you would not have taken your social anxiety to heart, if you decided you weren't going to deal with it. You wouldn't have moved to Canada, and you would not be working in sales, would you?
Wouldn't be working in sales, wouldn't have moved to Canada, wouldn't have started a podcast, wouldn't have started a newsletter talking about podcasts, wouldn't have been in sales, wouldn't have been speaking to you, Donna. Yeah, I don't even know where I'd be, but yeah, it would definitely not be where I'm at right now. That's for sure.
So pretty amazing journey when you think about it. So thank you for tuning in, guys. And thanks, Devesh, and catch you next time. Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the Better 2 podcast. Your listenership is greatly appreciated. If you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe. We also have our videos on YouTube. They're usually posted the same day as the podcast, and you should check it out. If you have a question or you would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. The email is Donna, Dauna, at thebetter2podcast.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and catch you next time.